Today we're opening up the comment box to see what y'all have to say about running Blender on a Mac. Haha, this dude thinks he can become a 3D artist on a Mac. He's out here playing with kids' toys. Dude, get a real computer already. Blender on Mac? Jeez, just get an NVIDIA card. You call that a cat? No, I call this an elephant. I was clearly drawing an elephant. I am in the right here. To be fair, the general vibe on the comment section of the videos where I mention Blender is pretty chill and really constructive. The community is freaking awesome. I'm just cherry picking a few things here and there for, dramatic effect. But there is this small undercurrent of people out there who think you should have a real computer in order to do any hardcore work in Blender. I disagree a little bit. So I got my hands on a new 14-inch M5 Macbook Pro. And I thought, instead of doing a normal review where I talk about the nano texture on the screen, the clickiness of the keyboard, or the space black aluminum frame, all of those are pretty cool, by the way, I would instead just use it as an excuse to fiddle around in Blender for a few days and talk about my experience instead. Because all the other reviews have already talked about all that other stuff anyway. All right, so let's get to the too long didn't read part of this video first, just to get it out of the way. Building Blender models on an M series Mac, any of them are great. The thing is that this thing is more than enough to tackle that sort of work, but when I get into rendering, I can definitely start to see where a Windows machine with a dedicated GPU can come in really handy. But I was pleasantly surprised at how well this performed, at least for the kind of tasks that I was doing. So my normal Blender machine is this guy behind me here. I assembled that computer about 2 years back, and its specs are an Intel Core i9 13900K, 64 gigabytes of RAM, about 6 terabytes of storage. I know that's crazy. I do video editing. I need a lot of storage. And an NVIDIA RTX 4080. And it's that last part, that 4080, that has really spoiled me the last 4 years. In Blender, there are different viewports that are good for different things. The default is the solid viewport. There's also the wireframe viewport, which is great for grabbing multiple points if you're in edit mode. And of course, there's also the rendered view, which will render out your scene in real time, so you can see how all your colors and your lighting and all that fun stuff come together immediately. And there are different rendering engines built into Blender. So if you go to the rendering tab, the default is Eevee, which is really well optimized, renders really fast no matter what computer I've used. And also it looks to me like just generally what Eevee looks like and how it renders has improved a bit over the last few iterations of Blender. It looked really good when I jumped into it today. But when it comes to like rendering out my final artwork that I'm going to share on social media or whatever, it cycles. That's the rendering engine that I really love. It has this great like clay look to it, and the lighting, like I like really soft lighting, so I like to set it up. Oh man, it just looks so good. I love cycles. Now, I mentioned before about being spoiled by that really nice graphics card. This is where it comes in handy. When I'm in that rendering view and I'm moving around, things are grainy, but then when you stop, it's gonna render that in real time and it's gonna start to get crisp. And it takes a half a second or two to really kind of catch up and do that. And on my PC, that real-time rendering works so well and is so fast that I just spend a lot of my time in rendering mode, not in the other modes, because it looks better. I don't need to. I just like to. So when I was testing out this Mac and using that rendering step is definitely much more pronounced. One, when you're moving around, it's a lot more pixelated, it's a lot grainier. And once you stop moving around, it does take longer for that sort of thing to come in view, at least when I was using it in real time. So while I was building out these models on the Mac, I ended up using the solid viewport more often, which is I think how most people work, because there it's just super smooth and the rendering didn't get in my way. And when I did want to see what things looked like, kind of just generally with the lighting, not like super accurate lighting, I was okay with switching renderers over to Eevee. Now, the good news here is that nowadays, Blender is native to Apple Silicon, and it has been for several years at this point. So the day-to-day workflow of just building out models is just as smooth as any PC I've used. So if you're new to Blender and just learning and worried about, hey, is my Mac good enough to handle it? If you have an M series Mac, you're gonna be okay. The one thing that I thought would throw me more than it did when I switched over to just using the Mac was not having a mouse. I was using the trackpad. Now I could always connect the mouse to it, but I was using the laptop in another room, sitting on the couch, just kind of chilling, watching TV. But when you have a mouse, that mouse wheel in the center really helps you out. First of all, just scrolling back and forth is going to zoom you in and out of your viewport. But also, when you click down on the mouse wheel, that acts like a third button that lets you pivot around your scene in real time. Crazy important when you're using Blender. Kind of really essential, but that's where the MacBook's trackpad comes in, and I found that it was really good for Blender. A trackpad, really hit or miss when you're using that on Windows. Here, rock solid. I got 2 fingers to just move around in 2D space, similar to that middle mouse button, and also pinch to zoom in and out of that canvas, or in and out of that workspace, I should say. Works incredibly well on a MacBook. Not to mention that the trackpad itself is a really good size, so you're never like running out of room or jumping off the side. But of course, the most important thing that we need to jump into here are our render tests. But first, I want to shout out my Learn to Draw in 60 Days course because I'm still running my Black Friday sale. Now, if you've ever taken a drawing class or a tutorial and thought, what am I missing here? This is above my head. My course is designed to give you the basics every day, a new lesson, so when you're done, you can jump into more advanced stuff. Learn more over on my website, bradsartschool.com. Okay, so rendering in real time is fun, but the real test comes in when you want to render out an entire animation. There are some ways to speed this up. Of course, I mentioned jumping over to Eevee before instead of using cycles. That will really speed it up, but I went ahead and used cycles because that's more fun. Now, by default, the max sample rate is set to a little over 4,000. And I decided to turn that down to 1,024. I still get a really crisp image with that, so I'm okay with that sample rate. I'm also rendering this image out at 1920 by 1920. It's a nice social media size. If you're like looking at like 4K video, a higher resolution, that's just going to take longer to crank out. And it's also worth pointing out the animation that I made here is super simple. We've got like a camera just swooping around. I'm taking 90 frames to do this entire thing at 30 frames per second. You're looking at a 3-second video here. If you want 3 seconds of video at 60 frames per second, again, that's going to take what, 2 times 90, 180 frames. So that's going to take considerably longer to render. You get the idea. So I went ahead and ran this experiment on my PC using the graphics card, and it took about 10 minutes, a little under 11 minutes actually, to render out all of my frames. And when I started the rendering process on the M5 Mac, I really expected it to take significantly longer, but it went way faster than I thought it would. It took 12 and a half minutes to render out all 90 frames. I really expected the PC to just absolutely obliterate the Mac here, but the Mac, very respectable. Now, when I was looking into this, one thing that I found is people mentioned you should set up the Mac, go into preferences, and then go to system and enable GPU for cycles. I don't know if that really did much here. The first time I rendered it out, I ended up just using the CPU to do it, and when I looked at the times on those things, they were pretty darn close. The second time I rendered this out with the GPU, it was only about a minute longer. In fact, the fact that it took longer kind of surprised me. Now, I should probably have pointed this out from the beginning. I am very much a 3D hobbyist. I am nowhere near like a professional level Blender user. And from my understanding, when you get into things like physics and more complicated things, you get into this area where a bulkier PC would pull ahead more significantly. And I'm just using simple models here with simple camera animations in a 4-light scene. So clearly my weak sauce models are not good enough to actually press this MacBook, so let's give it something a little bit harder. I went to Blender's website and they have some demo files. They create new images for every version of Blender that comes out, so I grabbed the 4.5 version of the images. They didn't have the 5.0 images yet on their site, and this thing is cool because it's this nice watercolored image. It looks great. I tweaked some of the settings so it would be done in a reasonable amount of time. And this time, with a heck of a lot more going on, it rendered a single image in 23 seconds on my PC with the 4080 graphics card, and the M5 Macbook Pro took 4 minutes and 32 seconds. And I think what this shows to me is that as the complexity goes up, you're going to want that discrete GPU. However, if you're just learning, if you're doing simple things like I'm doing, the MacBook Pro is going to serve you just fine. So this task, even though it's not that hardcore of a task for Blender in general, it is a pretty hardcore task for the MacBook. And while I was doing it, the fans definitely kicked on, which is pretty rare for these M series MacBook Pro machines. The fans were on, but this wasn't like a jet engine taking off, just kind of a low hum in the background. I have an M1 MacBook Pro that I've had for about 4 years now, and in that time, I've heard those fans kick on like 4 or 5 times maybe. And I'm not talking about 4 or 5 times a day. I'm talking like 4 or 5 times ever. I have exported a lot of videos from that MacBook over the years, and even then, the fans very, very rarely turn on. Now that is a 16-inch MacBook. There's more room for cooling and that sort of thing in a larger chassis like that. In my experience with this 14-inch MacBook, just in the last few weeks, the fans are more likely to turn on, but like I said, the fans aren't loud at all. I got them to run when I was exporting a video that I was working on a few weeks ago, and again when I was rendering just earlier today doing some of these tests. I did play some Cyberpunk 2077. Since there is a Mac version now, I didn't play for long, only like 20 minutes, but in that time, the fans only came on a little bit, and again, it was a low hum. I didn't really notice when they kicked on because I had the sound of the game playing, and I couldn't hear the fans over the sound of the game itself. And fan noise is one of my favorite parts of these M series Macs, because I remember the old Intel days where when I was working on a video on my Mac, it would really get loud. Not exporting a video, but just working on a video. Also exporting a video. So that is one part of this that is really, really nice. The other thing that I really like about this is battery life. Now, when I was exporting on this thing, I had it plugged in to get as much juice in there as possible. So if it needed more power to draw from, it wasn't just drawing on the battery. But judging from my past experiences when I used to export videos and things like that from my M1 MacBook, it really didn't throttle that much. It might pull more of the battery and use more of the battery when I was exporting a video, but I didn't notice any like slowdown in the actual export process. Doesn't mean it didn't happen, but it wasn't super pronounced if it did. Yeah, so overall, really impressed with this 14-inch little MacBook. Really solid. If you're thinking about just jumping into Blender and you're worried maybe a Mac isn't good enough, it's definitely good enough. Obviously, if you get into the more hardcore things in Blender and you feel like you're going to need better processing, you know, at that point, maybe you think about upgrading your PC. But I think if you're kind of at the basic level or even like an intermediate level, I don't know if you're really going to need it. Or if you already have a Mac from the last few years, Blender is free. Just try it. Start doing stuff. It's super fun. I have a Blender tutorial over on my other channel. Actually, some of the stuff that I was working on in this video is going to become tutorial fodder in the new year. I'm working on 2 or 3 videos for that channel for January. So check that. I'll link my second channel down below where I link some tutorials and beginner type stuff. But yeah, that is the M5 14-inch MacBook Pro and Blender. What do you think? You know, what kind of things did I miss in this video that maybe you hardcore Blender users would want to test out in a video like this? Let me know down below in the comments. Thank you all for watching, and I'll talk to you in a couple of days.